Section 2, Indiana's updated rules for buyer's agency. Now, Real University actually teaches in multiple states. This class is being taught live in Indiana. We do these classes in other states live as well. But while we're here for you guys, Section 2 is going to be specifically targeted towards some of the Indiana rules. Now, I will tell you, if you're listening to this in one of our other states, these rules, and I have read all of them, virtually parallel most states. All right? So if you're in another state listening, don't just tune out all of a sudden, because these actually will follow in parallel, in generic terms, what happened with your states as well. And I'll try and point out a few key areas for those of you that may be listening. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution of the buyer's agent. First of all, we understand what the state has defined the buyer's agency. It's an agreement where the agent, known as the buyer's agent, represents only the buyer's interest. You are going to act as their fiduciary. Once again, there's my favorite word. I tried to put that word in as many times as I can because I love saying fiduciary. Ensuring that the buyer's financial, personal, and legal needs are met. So, unlike the seller side, your responsibility is to get favorable terms for your client, which is the buyer. And you will solely advocate for the buyer. You know, we don't have to think about, well, is that going to be good for them, them being the sellers, because it's for your client, what's best for your client. Now, this evolution of the buyer's agency has been brought about by the consumer looking for better protection and clearer guidance. So, in the pre-70s, you know, long before most of you were even here, I can say I remember 1970, agency was typically skewed towards sellers. Matter of fact, there was only listing agents, and they focused exclusively on marketing and selling the properties of the homeowners, with very little emphasis on buyer representation. All right. Matter of fact, it was almost in the, if you guys have heard the caveat term, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. It was the buyer's job to figure out their process because the agent was representing the seller. Now, then there started creeping in this thing called dual agency. Now, dual agency is where you represent both the buyer and the seller on the same deal. Indiana calls this limited agency. Florida, if you're listening out there, outlaws this. You can't do this, all right? There's got to be some modification of the terms, and we're not going to go in depth in Florida's rules right now. But dual agency started coming around when there was a single agent working for the seller that decided that he wanted to, or she wanted to, help the buyer in the same transaction. So what you ended up getting was this inherent conflict of interest. Now, I'm going to take a sidebar here for a second and step out of the instructor role and talk to you as Raymond Modulin, the managing broker of a real estate brokerage. I believe that Indiana should outlaw this as well, all right? Because, as you see right here, there are inherent conflicts of interest. You cannot represent both parties to the fullest extent in dual agency. It's just not possible. I cannot disclose, which disclosure is one of my fiduciary obligations. I cannot disclose everything to my buyer that I know and yet keep confidentiality which is also one of my fiduciary responsibilities to my seller client. It can't happen. All right? So in Florida, how they get around this is they sign away the confidentiality portion of this. That's about all I want to talk about. We are going to be doing this course down in Florida, and we have a whole separate presentation for that class. All right? So then in the 80s, there was a growing number of buyers, including Indiana and every other state, that started wanting or seeking exclusive representation. Now, when I mean exclusive here, I don't mean like the exclusive buyer's agency. I mean they just wanted one guy or one agent for their side. They wanted one agent exclusively to deal with, where the seller would deal exclusively with theirs. So this marked a new era of the buyer's advocate coming on board, where they would negotiate strictly on the buyer's behalf, and all of these factors drove the demand and into the deal. Well, that also increased property values. It increased consumer awareness. It increased the advocacy. It increased the NAR's attention into what they should do to protect the buyers separately from protecting the sellers. They did not want to be constrained by this loyalty of a listing agent, quote unquote, helping a buyer. All right? So what happened was, through some state regulations and through some mandatory disclosure laws, they started having to disclose the agency to the client so that the buyer understood that their obligations and benefits from the agent. It also had to disclose if they were working for the seller as well, so the buyer knew this. Now, sometimes, most of the time, buyers don't know who the listing agent is and don't really know to think about it. There were some agents that were working both sides of the street, so to speak, without disclosing that they were in fact helping the seller at the same time. So these disclosures became imperative so that the buyers both knew and understood that they were looking or talking to the seller's representative as well. So that's what caused this shift in the consumers wanting to have this exclusive agent. By this disclosure, is like, hey, I'm the listing agent. That gave the buyer the option to go, you know what, I don't want to deal with you. I want to go get my own agent. So then in the 1990s, there was some legal framework that got changed and instituted into law. They evolved into these agents that specifically addressed agency relationship with just the client they're serving, which in this case was just the buyer. And they created these exclusive buyer agency representation. They established the fiduciary, told you I'd get that word in, duties that the buyer has. These reforms changed the landscape of how real estate worked, because now you had this listing agent that had these obligations to their seller, such as loyalty, confidentiality, reasonable skill and care. All of these, they were literally transferred over to the buyer's agent, where now this agent has the same loyalty, confidentiality, full disclosure, reasonable skill and care to protect the buyer himself. Then, like we talked about in the late 1990s, 1993, I guess that would be early, the NAR created the buyer's agency. They bought this company called the Real Estate, Buyer's Agency Corporation, REBAC. NAR absorbed that this company, this organization was specifically for buyer's agents. The NAR brought that in and made it officially an NAR regulation of buyer's agency. And now the ethics rules and all of the rules pertaining to real estate agents at the time now incorporated this buyer's agency. And the code of ethics was revised to accommodate this demand for people representing just the buyers. They help set the standards across the United States. So now we have to disclose any potential conflicts and maintain integrity throughout the transaction so that the clients, specifically the buyer, and the listing or the seller have a culture of professionalism, and they can trust because there are rules specifically laid out for each side of the transaction. So now buyers have the right and the option to work exclusively with an advocate of their interest, thus reducing any potential conflicts of a dual agency and ensuring a better outcome. Now, I don't know if the word better is the best word there. Ensuring a good outcome, all right? We can't really assume that all agents prior were working bad, so I don't want to say that it's a better outcome. It's the best outcome, all right? Exclusive buyer agency contracts now explicitly outline the duties that you will owe to them, the buyer, and they will owe to you. So what do you see going on in the future? Well, here's some things that I am expecting to help the buyer's agent. All right. We now have many digital platforms, and here's the new buzzword everybody wants to talk about, AI. It is beginning to play a significant role in providing buyers with real-time information. Now, I'm going to stop right there for a second. Think about this. When you guys are working for a buyer and he wants to look at a house, so you go pull some comps. Traditionally, the comps we pull are, 6 months back, 3 months back, I don't care, pick a date. And we go, hey, houses in this area have sold for X. How often, and don't raise your hands, no, put your hand down. How often do you do another comp the next day to see if that number's changed? Maybe there was a house that sold next door that hasn't been recorded yet, and you don't know about it, but it got recorded the next day. How many of us actually do a second comp the next day, or a third comp the third day, or a fourth comp? Do you get what I'm don't shake your head no. Do you get what I'm going towards? What I'm talking about is there are new comps potentially coming on the market every day. You're now 4 months into this buyer. Are you actually recomping? Well, with AI, I'm telling you now, there are platforms that will allow for real-time decision making, meaning that they have the ability to show houses that just closed today, and you can get a real time. And I have not worked with these platforms intensively yet. It is one of my goals to try and figure one out that works great, because in my mind what I see is some dashboard that as an agent we get to log into and can actually see the value of a home maybe increase or decrease based on recent comps, much like you see the stock market go up 2%, then it's down 10 minutes later, then it's up, or like gasoline. You guys ever bought gas and you drive away and the pump changes 2 minutes after that? I see that trend potentially coming with the availability of these digital platforms. So there's going to be a stricter guidelines, I believe, that are going to be coming in on board to increase because of the complexity of deals. So these are things that I see are coming. This is how Indiana's evolution has brought about the buyer's agency.